Soldiers bet she would fail, but when the gate opened, the Apache woman made the fort go silent. But on that morning, there was a different energy in the air. An unusual challenge was about to arrive, and no one inside the fort yet knew it. Far from the walls, a figure was moving swiftly and silently among the rocks and sagebrush. She was an Apache woman, known in her community for her courage and skill. Her name carried respect among her people, though few outsiders had heard it. She had faced dangers before, storms, wild animals, rival groups, but this challenge was unlike any she had faced. She had been asked to approach the fort, a place guarded by men who did not know her abilities. Some of them had even made a bet that she would fail. Inside the fort, the soldiers laughed and joked. "She won't make it past the gate," one said, spitting into the dirt. "I'll bet my boots she fails." Another laughed and added, "Even if she reaches the walls, she won't get past the sentries. I'd like to see her try." Their words were filled with arrogance, and they didn't stop to think that underestimating her might be their first mistake. Outside, the Apache woman crouched behind a large rock, studying the fort. The walls were high and strong, built of thick timber and stone. Guards patrolled the top, rifles ready, scanning the land below. But she did not panic. She had learned to watch, to wait, and to think before acting. Every movement of the soldiers was like a puzzle to her, a rhythm she could understand and plan around. She noted when the guards changed positions, how the sentries walked along the ramparts and where shadows offered cover. Every detail mattered. She remembered lessons from her family and elders. They had taught her to observe first, act second. In the forest, in the mountains, in the desert, these skills had kept her alive. Now, they would help her face a new kind of challenge. But she did not feel fear. She felt a quiet determination, the same feeling that had carried her through countless difficulties before. Her goal was not revenge or pride. It was a test of skill, a chance to show what she could do when everyone doubted her. The soldiers inside the fort continued their teasing. Some of them leaned over the walls, shouting down to the plains. "Come on, little lady. Show us what you've got." They laughed, thinking they were brave and clever. But their words only strengthened her resolve. She did not respond. She waited, her body pressed close to the ground, her eyes never leaving the fort. She knew that noise and haste could ruin her plan. Silence and patience would be her allies. As the morning moved on, the woman began to take careful steps toward the fort. She moved through tall grass and rocky patches, always keeping low, always moving quietly. The land around the fort was rough, full of stones and bushes, but she knew how to use it. Each step was deliberate, each breath measured. She reminded herself that this was not just a test of courage, it was a test of intelligence, observation, and control. From inside the fort, a few soldiers noticed a movement far off. One of them squinted. "Do you see that?" he asked, pointing. Others turned, but the figure was small and distant. They laughed again. "Probably a coyote," one said. "Or maybe the wind is playing tricks on you." They did not take it seriously. The Apache woman continued her approach, moving closer with every careful step. She was aware of everything: the way the sun reflected off the walls, the positions of the guards, the sound of the wind over the plains. She imagined the path she would take to reach the gate, imagining the steps, imagining the moment she would stand at the entrance. It was like a game of strategy, and she had been preparing for this all her life without even knowing it. As she moved, memories came to her mind. She remembered her father showing her how to move silently through the forest. She remembered nights spent listening to the sounds of the desert, learning to tell which noise meant danger and which did not. She remembered the pride in her community when she had succeeded in small tasks that others thought impossible. These memories gave her strength. They reminded her that she was capable, that her skills were real, and that doubt from outsiders could not shake her confidence. The soldiers inside the fort were becoming restless. One of them turned to the others. "I still think she'll fail," he said. "No one gets past these walls without trouble." Another laughed. "Let's just wait and see. We'll enjoy watching her try and fail." They had no idea how serious the woman was. To them, she was just another person trying to prove herself. To her, this was a challenge that demanded all of her attention. As the sun climbed higher, she approached the base of the hill that led to the fort. The walls were closer now, and she could see the details of the gates, the guards, and the narrow paths between the rocks. She slowed her pace even more, taking extra care. One wrong move could give her away. She crouched behind every bush and rock, using shadows to hide her form. Her hands moved lightly over the stones to steady herself, her eyes never leaving the soldiers. The soldiers at the fort began making their way to the gate area, some curious, some laughing. "Look, she's coming," one said. "I bet she won't even reach the gate." They still underestimated her. They did not see the careful planning in her movements. They did not see the confidence in her quiet eyes. They did not understand that her skill came not from luck, but from years of training, observation, and courage. The woman reached the first obstacle, a small ditch filled with stones. She paused and examined it. Jumping too quickly would make noise, but going too slowly might expose her. She balanced herself carefully, one step at a time, her mind calculating, her body moving with precision. When she reached the other side, she allowed herself a small, quiet breath of relief. One part of the journey was done, but the most important part was still ahead. She could now see the gate clearly. It was tall and strong, with heavy wooden beams and iron reinforcements. Guards were stationed near it, moving in predictable patterns. She studied them, noting every detail. One guard shifted his weight often, another scratched his arm, a third looked away at times. These small observations mattered. They would make the difference between success and failure. The sun was high in the sky now, and the heat made the stones and earth warm. The soldiers inside the fort continued their chatter, oblivious to how close she was. Some were joking about her chances, some were sharpening weapons, and a few were leaning against walls, watching the plains lazily. None suspected that the woman had almost reached the foot of the hill below the gate, moving with a quiet, determined grace. She paused for a moment, letting the soldiers' voices fade into the background. She focused only on her path, her movements, and her plan. The journey so far had tested her patience, her focus, and her courage. Now she was ready for the next step. The challenge was real, but so was her skill. She had prepared for this moment in silence, and now it was almost within her reach. And so, with the soldiers still betting on her failure, with the fort unaware of the skill approaching it, the Apache woman took her first step toward history. She would face obstacles, doubt, and danger ahead, but at that moment, she moved with confidence. She was calm, prepared, and ready to show that what others considered impossible could become possible with courage, intelligence, and determination. The stage was set. The soldiers did not yet know it, but the day was about to become unforgettable. The Apache woman stopped at the base of the hill, taking a moment to rest and study her surroundings. The fort loomed above her, strong and silent, its walls casting long shadows across the rocky land. The sun was bright, and the wind whispered softly through the grass and stones. Every sound was important, every detail mattered. She knew that this was the part of the journey where many could fail, not because the path was impossible, but because most were too careless or too proud. She looked at the fort's gate carefully. Heavy wooden doors were reinforced with iron bands, and guards walked along the ramparts above, watching for any movement below. The soldiers had been laughing and betting on her failure, confident that no one could approach unnoticed. But they did not know her. They did not know how she had learned to read the land, to move like the wind, and to think faster than most men. The first step was planning. She crouched low behind a large boulder, her dark eyes scanning the soldiers' movements. Each guard had a pattern, a rhythm to his steps, a pause before he turned, a glance to the left or right. She noted every detail, every small motion, like reading the lines of a story written in silence. She had learned this skill in the mountains, where observing a single shadow or the rustle of a branch could mean life or death. Now, it would help her approach the gate. She began to move again, slowly and carefully. Every step was deliberate. Rocks that might make a sound were avoided, patches of grass were pressed down gently, and even her breathing was controlled. She had learned to move in harmony with her surroundings, and now the land itself became part of her plan. The wind, the sun, and the shadows all worked with her, helping her remain unseen. As she advanced, she thought about the soldiers inside the fort. They were so certain of her failure. They had mocked her, laughed at her, and made bets on her inability to succeed. That arrogance made them blind. They did not see the careful calculations she was making, the years of skill and training behind each movement. They did not understand that courage alone was not enough. Intelligence, patience, and observation were just as important. She reached a small trench filled with stones and dry grass. One wrong step could make noise, alerting the soldiers above. She paused, studying the best path. Slowly, carefully, she placed one foot after the other, testing each stone for stability. When she reached the other side without a sound, she allowed herself a small smile. Each success brought her closer to her goal. But she knew that the hardest part was still ahead, reaching the gate itself. The fort seemed quiet from a distance, but she knew better. She could sense the tension in the air, the alertness of the guards, even the faint shuffle of their boots on the ramparts. She crouched behind a bush, waiting for the right moment. Timing would be everything. She could not rush. If she moved too quickly, she might be seen. If she hesitated too long, the guards might notice her in the growing heat of the afternoon. She remembered her father's lessons once more. "Watch carefully, move silently, think before you act," he had said. Those words echoed in her mind. She had followed them all her life, and now they guided her through this challenge. She adjusted her position, moving slightly to the left where a shadow provided cover. The soldiers above continued their routines, unaware that her eyes were on them, that her mind was calculating every step she would take next. Suddenly, a small bird flew up from the rocks nearby, flapping its wings loudly. The woman froze, holding her breath. The guards at the top glanced in that direction but saw nothing unusual. The moment passed, and she exhaled slowly. She had learned to stay calm even when unexpected events occurred. Every distraction could be dangerous, but every distraction could also be used. She smiled quietly to herself, knowing that her patience was as strong as her courage. She began moving again, carefully navigating a narrow path that led closer to the gate. The terrain was uneven, with rocks and patches of loose earth. One misstep could have caused a loud sound, but she moved like water over stones, smooth, quiet, and continuous. The soldiers' laughter and betting seemed distant now, almost like a story from another world. Her focus was on the land, the fort, and the path that led her to the entrance. Reaching a slightly higher rock, she paused once more. From this vantage point, she could see the gate clearly, and she noted every guard's position. 2 men were stationed near the door, their rifles ready, while another paced along the rampart above. She could see the small gaps between the guards' patrols, moments when no one's eyes would be on the area she needed to cross. This was the moment where skill mattered most. She would have to move quickly but carefully to avoid detection. The woman's heart did not race. She had faced many dangers before, and her confidence came from experience, not bravado. She remembered the nights she had spent in the forest, learning to read the wind and the stars to anticipate danger before it arrived. Now that training was paying off. She had become invisible in plain sight, a shadow moving with purpose. She knew that success would not come from strength alone, it would come from patience, intelligence, and careful timing. She took a deep breath and began her final approach to the gate. The first step was across a small, open area, partially exposed to the guard's view. She moved slowly, one hand touching the ground for balance, the other brushing against the rocks for cover. Every step was calculated, every movement measured. The guard's eyes scanned the land, but they were following patterns, not expecting someone to move so carefully. One of the guards shifted, glancing to the left. She froze, blending into the shadows. Moments passed and the guard returned to his routine. She continued, moving from one shadow to the next, each step bringing her closer to the gate. The open area seemed endless, but her focus did not waver. She knew that one misstep could end her mission, but she also knew that careful planning could lead her to success. Finally, she reached the first wooden post near the gate, hidden from the guards' direct view. She crouched behind it, catching her breath and studying the next part of her path. The gate itself was tall and imposing, but she had already planned how to approach it. The guards above were still unaware of how close she had come, their confidence blinding them to her skill. She allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. Every step so far had been perfect. Every movement had been silent. And yet, she did not become careless. The most important part was still ahead, the moment when she would reach the gate and prove the soldiers wrong. She felt a quiet thrill at the thought, but also a calm resolve. This was not about proving them wrong for the sake of pride. It was about demonstrating skill, intelligence, and courage. The woman moved closer, using every shadow, every rock, and every small bush for cover. The soldiers inside the fort continued their betting and laughing, completely unaware of her careful, calculated approach. She could hear their voices, but they seemed distant, almost like echoes. Her attention was entirely on the gate and the final steps that would lead her there. As she prepared to take the last steps to reach the gate, she remembered all the lessons that had brought her here: patience, observation, intelligence, courage. Every lesson mattered, every experience had prepared her for this moment. She moved forward with calm confidence, her eyes never leaving the guards, her mind calculating each movement. The gate was close now, and the soldiers, bet on her failure, seemed more foolish with every step she took. In that quiet moment, she felt the connection between skill and determination. She had trained for challenges like this all her life, though perhaps not in this exact form. Yet the skills she had learned in the forests, mountains, and deserts had led her here. She had become a master of patience, timing, and movement. She had become invisible in the open land, unnoticed by those who underestimated her. And so, with the fort looming above her, the soldiers laughing and betting inside, and the gate just ahead, she prepared for the next stage. The hardest part was about to begin, but she was ready. Her careful approach, her observation, and her skill had brought her this far. Now, the moment of truth was nearly at hand. She would face the gate, the guards, and the final test of her abilities. And when she succeeded, it would be a moment no one inside the fort would ever forget. The Apache woman moved carefully along the rocky path, her eyes fixed on the gate of the fort. The walls were tall, strong, and imposing, but she did not feel fear. She had faced many challenges before in the mountains and deserts, where life had tested her courage and patience. The fort was no different, except that this challenge required not only her strength but her intelligence and precision. She paused behind a large boulder, catching her breath. From here she could see the soldiers more clearly. 2 guards stood at the base of the gate, their rifles ready. Above them, on the ramparts, others moved back and forth, their boots tapping against the wooden planks. Their movements were predictable, but they were also alert. One wrong step, one careless motion, and she would be discovered. But the woman did not panic. She had been trained to remain calm under pressure, to think clearly even in the face of danger. She began to move again, carefully, like a shadow slipping across the land. Every step was deliberate. Rocks were avoided, dry leaves and loose earth were stepped on lightly, and her breathing was controlled. She could hear the wind rustling through the grass and the faint footsteps of the guards above. All these sounds blended into a rhythm that she could use to her advantage. She was moving in harmony with her surroundings, becoming invisible to those who underestimated her. As she advanced, she remembered the stories her elders had told her about their ancestors. They spoke of courage, of cleverness, and of the importance of patience. Those stories were not just tales, they were lessons. She carried them with her, feeling their strength guide her movements. She had learned that being patient was often more powerful than rushing, and that intelligence could overcome physical obstacles when skill was applied carefully. She reached a narrow path that led closer to the gate. The path was uneven, with rocks and patches of loose dirt. She crouched low, touching the ground lightly to test each step before placing her full weight on it. One misstep could have been disastrous. The soldiers above were still confident, laughing and joking, completely unaware of her careful approach. Their arrogance made them blind to the skill she possessed. She moved along the path slowly, carefully, each movement precise and deliberate. Her eyes never left the guards. One of them paused, adjusting his rifle, and she froze, blending into the shadows. The moment passed and he returned to his patrol. She exhaled quietly, reminding herself that patience and observation were just as important as courage. Every second mattered and she was using each one wisely. The woman approached a small ditch filled with stones. She stopped to study it. The stones were loose, and stepping on them carelessly would make a loud noise. She thought for a moment, then found a path that allowed her to cross quietly. She tested each stone with her hand before stepping, moving slowly but steadily. When she reached the other side without making a sound, she felt a quiet satisfaction. Each success brought her closer to her goal, but she remained focused, knowing that the hardest part was still ahead. From above, the guards began to move closer to the gate, unaware of the shadow slipping silently toward them. One guard shifted his weight and glanced around. The woman froze, pressing herself against a rock. The guard looked for a moment and then returned to his duties. She waited for the right timing, knowing that rushing now could ruin everything. Her patience was her greatest weapon and she would use it carefully. She moved closer to the gate, using every shadow and rock for cover. The soldiers continued their bets, their voices carrying across the fort. "I still don't think she'll make it," one said. "She's too small to get past us." Another laughed. "Even if she does, she won't get far. She's only human." They did not understand that this human had patience, skill, and intelligence beyond their imagination. Every step she took disproved their doubts, even if they could not yet see it. She reached a small cluster of bushes near the gate. From here, she could see the guards more clearly. Their movements were predictable. One looked to the left, another adjusted his rifle, and the third shifted his weight. She studied each motion carefully, planning her next steps. Timing would be everything. One wrong move and she would be discovered. But she did not hesitate. Her plan was precise, and her movements had been practiced in her mind countless times. The woman took a deep breath and began moving again. She slipped between shadows, her body close to the ground, each step silent. She was like a whisper across the land, a shadow that moved without sound. The soldiers above remained unaware, still laughing and betting on her failure. Their overconfidence blinded them to the skill and precision she possessed. She reached a small ledge near the gate, hidden from the guards' direct view. From here she could see the patterns of their movements more clearly. 2 guards were stationed near the base of the gate, moving back and forth. Above them, another patrol walked along the rampart, their boots tapping in a predictable rhythm. She studied every step, every pause, and every glance. Her mind calculated the perfect moment to move. The woman crouched behind the ledge, waiting for the guards' attention to shift. She knew that timing was everything. If she moved too early, she would be seen. If she waited too long, someone might notice her presence. She had to move with precision. She reminded herself of the lessons she had learned in the wild: watch, wait, and act only when the moment was right. A slight breeze blew across the land, rustling the grass and masking the faint sound of her movements. She used the wind to her advantage, moving a little closer with each passing second. Her body was low, her movements slow and deliberate. She felt the rhythm of the land, the placement of each rock and bush, and used them to remain hidden. The soldiers continued their routines, oblivious to how close she had come. She remembered the words of her father once more. "The mind is stronger than the body. Observe first, act later. Patience is your greatest weapon." She had followed these words all her life, and now they guided her through this final approach. Every step she took was careful, every movement calculated. She had become invisible in plain sight, a shadow moving silently toward the gate. Finally, she reached a small rock formation just a few feet from the gate. From here, she could see every guard clearly. Their rifles rested across their shoulders, their eyes scanning the land. They were confident, unaware of the shadow that had moved so carefully among them. She smiled quietly, not from pride but from satisfaction at her skill. Every moment of patience, every careful step had brought her to this point. She paused, planning her final approach. The gate was close now and the guards were still unaware. Her heart did not race. She had faced many dangers before and this was simply another challenge. Her courage, intelligence, and patience had carried her this far. Now she would complete the final steps to reach the gate. The woman waited for the perfect moment. One guard looked away, another adjusted his rifle, and the third moved slightly to the side. She saw the opening she needed. With careful precision, she moved forward, each step silent, each movement controlled. The soldiers above remained unaware, still confident in their bets on her failure. She reached the gate, hidden in the shadows. From here, she could see the details of the wooden doors, the iron bands, and the guards stationed nearby. She studied them carefully, planning her next actions. The hardest part was not over, but she had already proven her skill and patience. Every movement had been perfect, every step calculated. She had reached the point where the impossible could become possible. The woman crouched near the gate, her eyes focused and her mind calm. She had navigated the rough terrain, avoided detection, and moved silently past the guards. The soldiers' confidence had been misplaced. Their bet on her failure was about to be disproved. She had shown courage, intelligence, and patience, and now the final challenge awaited her. As the sun moved higher in the sky, she prepared for the next step. The gate was before her, the guards unaware, and the moment of truth was near. She reminded herself of the lessons that had brought her here: patience, observation, courage, and intelligence. With each careful step, she had come closer to the goal. Now she would face the gate, the final obstacle, and complete the challenge that no one believed she could achieve. The Apache woman crouched near the gate, her dark eyes studying every detail. The fort loomed above her, tall and strong, yet she felt no fear. She had come this far by using her intelligence, patience, and careful observation. Now she faced the final challenge, the moment when she would reach the gate itself. One wrong move could reveal her, but she trusted her skills. She had trained for challenges like this all her life, even if they had never taken this exact form. The guards near the gate moved as usual, checking the area and adjusting their rifles. One leaned against the wall, wiping sweat from his forehead. Another shifted his weight and glanced to the left. A third moved along the rampart above, unaware of the shadow that had silently approached the entrance. The soldiers inside the fort were confident, still joking about the bet they had placed. They had no idea how close the Apache woman was, and they did not see the careful planning behind every movement she had made. She took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, and then moved a little closer to the gate. Every step was deliberate, calculated, and silent. The rocks beneath her were uneven, but she placed her feet with care, testing each one before shifting her weight. She pressed herself against a wooden post near the gate, blending into the shadows. She could feel the heat of the sun on her back, the wind brushing past her face, but nothing distracted her focus. This was the moment she had been preparing for, and she was ready. The guards shifted again, moving slightly closer to each other. She waited, observing their patterns. Patience had carried her this far, and she would not rush now. She needed the right moment, a small opening that would allow her to approach the gate without being noticed. Every sound mattered: the faint creak of wood under the guards' boots, the rustle of their clothing, even the distant chirping of birds. She had learned to use these natural sounds to mask her movements. Finally, she saw her chance. One guard looked away, distracted by the sunlight reflecting off a distant rock. Another adjusted his rifle, and the third moved along the rampart, leaving a small space near the gate unobserved. The opening was brief, lasting only a few seconds, but it was enough. She pressed herself low, moving with fluid grace, like a shadow slipping between the stones. Her body was close to the ground, her hands brushing lightly against the rocks and wooden posts. She reached the wooden gate just a few feet away from the nearest guard. She paused, studying the heavy doors. They were reinforced with iron bands, strong enough to resist force. But she did not need force. She had observed the structure carefully, noticing a small gap where the doors met and the latch mechanism that held them closed. Her mind calculated the steps she would take, the sequence of movements that would allow her to open the gate without alerting the guards. With steady hands, she moved closer to the latch. Her fingers were nimble and precise, guided by years of practice and experience. She tested the mechanism lightly, noting how it moved and where it clicked into place. She could hear the faint sound of the guards above, their voices carrying across the courtyard. They were still confident, still joking about her failure, unaware that the moment of truth was upon them. Carefully, she lifted the latch, her movements slow and controlled. The gate creaked slightly, but the sound was masked by a gust of wind that rustled the grass and leaves around her. She paused for a moment, listening for any sign of alarm. The guards had not noticed. She allowed herself a small smile, knowing that her patience and careful observation had paid off. She had reached the point where skill and intelligence mattered more than strength. The gate began to open inch by inch. She pushed it gently, testing its movement, ensuring that it did not make a loud noise. The gap widened slowly, just enough for her to slip through. She pressed herself against the side, moving with the same careful precision that had carried her this far. The soldiers inside the fort were oblivious, still confident that she would fail. Their laughter and jokes echoed faintly, but she did not let them disturb her focus. As she slipped through the gap, she felt a surge of quiet triumph. She had reached the gate, navigated the obstacles, and avoided detection. But she did not celebrate yet. The hardest part was not just reaching the entrance, it was making her presence known in a way that would leave an impact. She moved carefully into the courtyard, keeping low and silent, observing the soldiers as she passed. Every step was measured, every movement deliberate. The guards began to notice something unusual. One glanced down, spotting a shadow moving near the gate. His eyes widened in surprise, and he called out to his companions. "Did you see that?" he shouted, pointing toward the shadow. The others turned, trying to understand what was happening, but it was too late. The Apache woman had already moved closer, her presence commanding attention without force or noise. She stood for a moment, letting the soldiers take in the sight of her. The fort, once filled with laughter and betting, went silent. Every soldier froze, unsure of what they were witnessing. They had underestimated her, mocked her, and placed bets on her failure. Now they saw a figure of calm confidence, intelligence, and skill, someone who had navigated impossible obstacles and arrived at the gate without a single misstep. The Apache woman's eyes scanned the courtyard. She did not speak, but her presence said everything. She had proven that courage, patience, and intelligence could overcome even the most confident arrogance. The soldiers looked at each other, realizing that their assumptions had been wrong. They had expected failure, and instead they were met with skill and quiet authority. One of the guards finally broke the silence. How did she do it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The others could only shake their heads, still trying to comprehend the situation. They had bet on her failure, but she had not only succeeded, she had done so with grace and precision that left them in awe. The woman took a few steps into the courtyard, her movements calm and deliberate. She did not boast or shout. She did not need to. Her actions spoke louder than words. Every soldier watched her, their confidence replaced with respect, amazement, and a hint of fear. They realized that underestimating her had been a mistake. They realized that skill and patience could overcome arrogance and doubt. She paused near the center of the courtyard, looking around at the soldiers who had once mocked her. Her gaze was steady, her presence commanding. The fort was silent, not from fear, but from the recognition of her achievement. The soldiers had been certain she would fail, yet here she stood, proving that intelligence, courage, and careful planning could accomplish what they had thought impossible. For a moment, the courtyard seemed to hold its breath. The Apache woman's presence was like a quiet storm, powerful but controlled. She had moved through obstacles, avoided detection, and reached the heart of the fort without causing unnecessary conflict. Her victory was not loud or aggressive. It was measured, precise, and unforgettable. The guards exchanged glances, understanding that this was a lesson they would not forget. They had learned something important. Never underestimate someone based on appearances or assumptions. The woman had shown them that determination, intelligence, and patience could defy expectations. Her actions left a mark on the fort that would be remembered for a long time. As the sun moved across the sky, the Apache woman stood silently in the courtyard, letting the soldiers process what had happened. She had completed the challenge, but she did not linger. Her goal had been to prove her skill, to demonstrate courage, and to show that intelligence could triumph over doubt. She had done all of this without raising her voice or causing harm. Her presence alone commanded respect and admiration. Finally, she turned, moving toward the exit of the courtyard. The soldiers watched her leave, still silent, still amazed. Their bets had been wrong, their assumptions shattered. She had proven herself in a way that no words could fully express. The fort would remember this day, not for the bet the soldiers had made, but for the courage and skill of the Apache woman who had moved silently through obstacles and emerged victorious. As she disappeared beyond the walls, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had faced the challenge, relied on her skills, and succeeded. The fort had gone silent in recognition of her achievement, and the soldiers would carry the lesson of this day for the rest of their lives. She had shown that determination, patience, and intelligence could overcome even the most confident doubts. And so the Apache woman moved on, leaving behind a story that would be told in whispers, admired for its courage, and remembered for the quiet power of skill and perseverance. The fort remained, strong and silent, but its soldiers were changed. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a true lesson in courage, intelligence, and the quiet strength of someone who refused to be underestimated. The Apache woman moved away from the fort slowly, her movements still careful, even though the main challenge had been completed. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty plains. The day had been hot and the fort was quiet, but she felt a calm satisfaction. She had done what others said was impossible. She had moved past the guards, opened the gate, and stood in the courtyard without a sound, leaving the soldiers speechless. As she walked, she thought about what had just happened. The soldiers inside the fort had laughed, mocked, and placed bets on her failure. They had assumed she was too small, too inexperienced, or too unskilled to succeed. But she had relied on something they had forgotten: patience, intelligence, careful observation, and courage. She smiled quietly to herself, knowing that she had proven not only her abilities but also the importance of believing in oneself. The landscape around her was quiet, dotted with rocks, sagebrush, and dry grass. Birds flew overhead and the wind brushed softly across the plains. She moved with confidence, but she did not hurry. Each step was deliberate, allowing her to reflect on the day and the lessons it held. She thought about how people often judge others too quickly, without understanding their skills or determination. She had faced this before, but today it had been made clear to her in the most vivid way. Behind her, the fort remained silent. The soldiers were still processing what they had witnessed. Some were amazed, some confused, and some quietly admiring the skill of the woman who had outsmarted them. Their confidence had been broken, but they had also learned a valuable lesson. Strength and power are not the only measures of ability. Intelligence, patience, and determination can be just as powerful, if not more so. As she continued her journey across the plains, she thought about her people and the lessons they had taught her. Her family had always emphasized the importance of skill, patience, and courage. They had told stories of ancestors who had faced challenges with careful planning and determination, teaching her that even the most difficult obstacles could be overcome. Today, she had added her own story to that tradition, proving that these lessons were not just words, they were a way of life. The Apache woman's mind wandered to the soldiers she had left behind. They had underestimated her from the start, judging her by appearances rather than understanding her abilities. She felt no anger, only a quiet sense of accomplishment. She knew that she had changed something in their minds, even if only slightly. They would remember the day she moved silently into their fort, opened the gate, and stood in the courtyard with calm confidence. Her journey across the plains allowed her to reflect on the importance of preparation and observation. Every step she had taken toward the fort had been carefully planned. Every movement had been deliberate, designed to avoid detection. She had studied the patterns of the guards, the structure of the gate, and the surrounding terrain. This careful planning had made the impossible possible, turning a dangerous challenge into a triumph of skill and patience. As the sun moved lower, she began to see familiar landmarks in the distance, rocks and hills that reminded her of home. She felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. The challenge had tested her in many ways, but she had relied on her instincts, her intelligence, and her courage to succeed. She had moved through obstacles that others thought insurmountable, proving that determination and careful planning could overcome even the most confident doubts. She also thought about the silence that had fallen over the fort. That moment had been powerful, not because she had shouted or shown force, but because she had acted with precision and intelligence. The soldiers had been left speechless, their assumptions shattered. She had not needed to prove herself with words or displays of strength. Her actions had spoken louder than anything else could have. The Apache woman's mind wandered to the lessons she had learned along the way. She realized that patience and careful observation were often more powerful than speed and force. She had moved quietly, hidden by shadows and natural sounds, blending with the land. She had studied the guards, anticipating their movements and finding openings. Every detail mattered, and every careful step had brought her closer to her goal. As evening approached, the plains grew cooler, and the shadows stretched longer. She moved with steady determination, knowing that the lessons of the day would stay with her forever. She thought about the soldiers at the fort and the lesson she had taught them without saying a word. Underestimating someone based on appearances or assumptions could lead to surprise, failure, or respect earned too late. She also reflected on her own growth. Today had been a test not only of skill, but of courage and confidence. She had relied on everything she had learned in her life, skills honed over years, lessons from family and elders, and experiences in the wild. She had faced doubt, challenges, and obstacles, and had come out victorious. The day had strengthened her belief in her abilities and in the power of careful planning and determination. The Apache woman paused to rest near a small stream, the water glinting in the last rays of sunlight. She knelt and drank slowly, feeling the cool water refresh her body. The land around her was quiet, peaceful, and familiar. She thought about the journey she had taken, from the base of the hill to the courtyard of the fort, and she felt pride. Not pride in arrogance, but pride in accomplishment, and in proving that careful thought, courage, and skill could make a difference. As she continued, she imagined how the story of the day would be told. Perhaps some would speak of it in whispers, sharing the tale of a woman who moved silently into a fort and left soldiers speechless. Perhaps it would inspire others to rely on intelligence and patience, rather than underestimating others or assuming that strength alone was enough. The story was more than a personal achievement. It was a lesson for anyone willing to listen. The plain stretched wide before her, open and full of possibilities. She moved with purpose, knowing that each step was part of a larger journey. The day had taught her that courage was not just about facing danger, but about facing challenges with intelligence and preparation. She had learned that determination and careful observation could overcome obstacles that seemed impossible. and she had learned that even those who doubted you could be changed by your actions. As night began to fall, the Apache woman reached the edge of the land she knew. The stars appeared in the sky, shining brightly above the quiet plains. She stopped for a moment, looking up at the vast expanse, feeling a connection to the land, to her people, and to the lessons she had learned. The fort and its soldiers were behind her now, but the memory of their surprise, silence, and respect remained with her. She thought about the importance of humility and reflection. She had accomplished something extraordinary, but she did not need to boast. Her actions had spoken for themselves. The fort had gone silent, the soldiers had been amazed, and the lessons of patience, intelligence, and courage had been demonstrated. She knew that true accomplishment was measured not by applause or recognition, but by the quiet satisfaction of having done your best and proven your skill. The Apache woman continued her journey, her mind calm and her heart full. She had faced a challenge that others said she could not overcome, and she had succeeded. The lessons of the day, the power of patience, observation, intelligence, and courage, would stay with her forever. She had proven that even when others doubt you, determination and skill can achieve the impossible. As she walked under the starry sky, she reflected on the journey ahead. Life would bring other challenges, but she knew that she was prepared. The experience had strengthened her confidence, her patience, and her ability to face obstacles with intelligence and courage. She had proven herself in a way that mattered, not for recognition or reward, but for the satisfaction of knowing that skill, determination, and careful thought could overcome even the most confident doubts. Finally, she reached a familiar place near her home, where the land was quiet and safe. She paused, looking back toward the fort in the distance. The soldiers would remember the day for a long time, and perhaps they would tell the story to others. But she did not linger on their reactions. Her focus was on the lessons she had learned, the journey she had taken, and the quiet satisfaction of having accomplished something remarkable. The Apache woman smiled softly, feeling the strength and wisdom that had guided her throughout the day. She had proven that courage, intelligence, patience, and careful planning could overcome doubt and underestimation. She had moved silently, observed carefully, and acted with precision. And in doing so, she had created a story of achievement and respect that would endure far longer than the moment itself. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill her lungs, and continued walking toward her home. The journey of the day had ended, but the lessons, pride, and satisfaction would stay with her forever. She had faced a challenge that seemed impossible, and she had emerged victorious, not with force but with skill, courage, and intelligence. The Apache woman had proven that the impossible could become possible, and that the power of determination and careful planning was greater than any doubt. As she disappeared into the night, the plains were quiet once more, but the story of her courage and skill would live on. The soldiers at the fort would remember the day a woman moved silently, opened the gate, and left them speechless. They would remember the lesson she had taught without words, the power of patience, intelligence, and determination. And the Apache woman would carry that lesson with her, proud, calm, and ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.